Women are raised to work. We spend countless years in education. We're never prepared for motherhood, though. When women become mothers, it's so overwhelming because they're learning all of these skills of motherhood that were not passed down to them. And it's a lot easier to relegate that duty to somebody else, like a daycare provider, than it is to take that on yourself.
Toxic femininity versus Catholic femininity. Catholic femininity versus the world. We're going to have that conversation today with Angela Erickson from The Integrated Life. You might recall Angela. She was sub-hosting for us on the Ask a Priest live program, which is heard 6 p.m. Eastern all across the Station of the Cross Media Network. And she did a great job filling in for us. But she has a YouTube channel called Integrated with Angela Erickson. Today we're going to be talking about those deep, dark contrasts between what we believe and what the world wants to sell.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Hey, we're talking about Catholic femininity versus the world. Toxic femininity versus Catholic femininity. And I've invited Angela Erickson to be on the show today. She has a YouTube channel, Integrated with Angela Erickson. You can find it on YouTube. Just look for Integrated Angela. Angela, good morning to you. Thanks for being on the team today.
Thanks for having me back on. It means a lot.
Praise be to God. You did a great job on Ask a Priest Live, by the way. We really appreciated having you on our team, so thank you for doing that. We'd love to get you back soon to do that. But I wanted to talk about Catholic femininity versus the world. Yesterday, I dealt with toxic masculinity in a modern world. Do you see that, as far as I know, men and women are obviously different, that much we know, but as far as the attacks of modernism on women, it seems like there's some common threads here.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the whole girl boss mentality has really been extremely damaging to the family. I think that's just... Nobody can deny that has been really damaging because it has really severed women from their very nature. We're not made to be girl bosses. We are made to be mothers. And the church has always given us the antidote, whether it's in religious life, that maternity that we have being expressed in how we treat the poor, how we treat orphans, as we saw in Cabrini. She called those children her children. And I loved that nurturing portrayal of her. She wept over her children. But we do that too as mothers. I'm pregnant with my 6th child, and that's where God called me. I had a job that I loved, and I left it so that I could be home with my children. And that's where we're made to find fulfillment. But I do find that a lot of women have been so severed from their identity, severed from their nature, that they have a hard time connecting with motherhood. And those women who cannot figure out a way to integrate their maternity into their identity tend to resent motherhood. And so that's the problem that we face today, is how do we get women to a place where they learn how to integrate their motherhood into their daily life in a way that expresses the joy that we're meant to have as mothers.
I remember when I brought my wife home from work, she was making more money than me. She was a paralegal. But I remember in those days, she worked for an attorney. One of the attorneys she worked for was a female. And she was young. She was just past the bar. She was excited about her career. And then she got pregnant and had a child. And then she came into the office and wept every single day that she couldn't be home with her child. And I remember my wife being really impacted by that, and it sort of hit her that the world sells women one message. That the world seems to be putting on these blinders for them. How hard is it for women to accept truth over the lie?
Honestly, it is. It's extremely difficult. I actually wrote about this about a year ago in an article that was published in Crisis. The article is titled Against Feminism. But basically, my thesis in the article is that women are raised to work. We spend countless years in education. We graduate with degrees. We're never prepared for motherhood, though. Often, especially for the millennial generation and younger, moms were working. So that wasn't necessarily even modeled for us. So not only was it not modeled for us in the home, but then we're trained for a career. So that's where we feel comfortable. That's where we're trained to feel comfortable. And so for a lot of women, you do have women like myself who go to work after becoming a mother and they feel torn. I think that's a very common experience, but they're so comfortable in a working environment because that's what they were literally trained to do. They weren't trained to be a mother. For many women and fathers, but the first diaper they change is the diaper of the first child in the hospital. That's not normal. That's not how we prepare women for motherhood. And so then when women become mothers, it's so overwhelming because often they're trying to learn how to be a wife for the first time, which is a whole nother learning curve. Then they become moms and they're learning all of these skills of motherhood that were not passed down to them. They're learning how to cook. They're learning how to clean. They're learning how to bake. They're learning how to take care of a sick child. All of these things seem really overwhelming. They're learning how to breastfeed, all of these things. And it's a lot easier to relegate that duty to somebody else, like a daycare provider or the government and public school, than it is to take that on yourself and own that. And so a lot of women find it more comfortable to send their kids away to these other institutions while they go to work because it's what they know. And so for me, I believe that we have to do a better job preparing young women for that role. It is the most important role that a woman will ever inhabit. That's what we were made for, and that's where our legacy lies. And so if we're not preparing women for that, we are failing them. And I think we've failed a lot of women, which is why we see that feminism has taken such a deep root with this girl boss phenomenon.
And it's so true. Like, how to be a mom, how to be a wife, how to be a husband, how to do certain tasks. We've lost this art, and Dr. Carrie Gress hits on this. This lack of laughter in the home is a symptom of a greater problem. There's no community in the home. There's no mentorship in the home anymore. There's no passing from one generation down to the next, and the next generation caring for the elderly in their homes and their families anymore. It is a lost art. It is a lost cause, it seems, in many ways. Do you think it's possible to restore that? Do you think we can decide this far and no further?
I think there is a growing segment of women who are going out of their way to reconnect with their femininity. And I see a lot of promise there. It is difficult because we see on a political level, there's a huge divide. And I think that the chasm is really growing right now of women and men who are trying to live more in accordance with their nature, trying to reconnect with their telos in a lot of ways. And then there's a segment of the population that is very much determined to be progressive and to always be progressing to an end of which we know not. And so what we are confronted with is we're going to have to battle it out. And at the end of the day, I'm hopeful because I feel like and this sounds kind of silly, but it's true. We're going to outbreed them. I mean, that's one thing. And so, I'm kind of hopeful that as more mothers are choosing to stay home and are raising their kids and they're investing time in those relationships, because I think what you're describing too with the broken home situation, which is so prevalent and common. I mean, I experienced that as well. There is that, I think there's a tendency for a lot of emotional neglect in those situations as well. I talked about this with Layla Miller about her book, Primal Loss. Must have been a year or two ago. But really, the children are the ones at the end of that emotional neglect most of the time, because children are expected to be resilient. And that's just a lie. Children are not resilient, they adapt. Those are very different things. And so I do think that with more mothers staying home, with husbands prioritizing work, that affords them the opportunity for their wives to stay home and really being serious about that. I hear it from women all the time. I want to stay home, but my husband doesn't want to lose my income and I don't know what to do because I want to be home with my children. What do I say to him? What do I do? And we have to prioritize our children again. And the more that we do that, the more that we invest in them, our children will remember that. I mean, because so many of us are sitting there looking at, I wish someone would have been around to help teach me how to emotionally regulate, for example. Well, children don't learn that unless it's modeled for them and their parents, and if they have a secure attachment with their parents. Things like that, where they feel safe and provided for. And a lot of children coming from broken families, life is uncertain because their experience of the world is that the very foundation of their life can be shattered in a moment. So we have to prioritize our children again. We have to invest in them. And my hope is that the segment of women and families who are prioritizing their children again, remembering that this is their legacy, that these children will grow up to be high functioning adults, successful in society, and will continue to grow a more traditional ethos within the culture, because the pendulum is always swinging. And so I'm confident that the pendulum will swing back in the right direction within the next generation or two.
How about finances? Are we living in a necessary 2-income home? I mean, because we just got, Angela, listen, God wants me to have the Ford F-150 Raptor in midnight blue. Okay. Yeah. I know I don't ever actually do desert running at 100 miles an hour, but I need a truck that can do it, whether or not I ever see a desert with it. And the house has to be a good one. It's got to be a good one. So, I mean, I don't understand what your problem is, Angela. I mean, we just need 2 incomes. That's the way it goes. Why are our finances so out of whack?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. I think in some situations it is necessary. And I will point to the Proverbs 31 woman, right? Like before the Industrial Revolution, women always did work at home and they were contributing economically. And men were working at home too. So the division of labor was such that men were actually home with their children as well. And not only that, but they had so much more support because there were other people, usually it was a multi-generational home. You had family living close by. You had so much more support. And so I don't want to ignore that. In fact, I was just listening to a podcast with Nancy Percy. She just put out a book on toxic masculinity and really restoring true masculinity in our society. And it's just a phenomenal interview that I listened to. I want to go buy her book. But she talks about how books were actually written, like child rearing books were actually written for men before the Industrial Revolution, which I found really interesting, right? It says a lot. And so I don't want to say like women, you're not allowed to have any sort of income. I mean, I do a podcast. I don't make any money. I lose a lot of money doing it. But I don't think that means we're not allowed to have hobbies and interests and have any sort of economic influence within our home, but we can't sacrifice our children in that pursuit. And so I do think that if it is truly essential, I think the men should hustle. This is my opinion, and this is what we've done in our home. The men should hustle and do everything they can and be super prudent with your finances. I think you're exactly right. I think a lot of families aren't willing to make the right sacrifices. They want to keep up with the Joneses. I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody, but it's very common. Don't be afraid to buy a used car and just run that thing down into the ground. You don't need to have the latest, most fancy house. You don't need to have all of these things. And also learn to invest. Like, I think men, especially if you're the ones running the finances in your home, learn how to invest and what you should be doing with your finances to set your family up for long-term wealth instead of just focusing on the short term. Let's just get the bills paid for month to month. So that combined with women, if you really do need to bring in an income, don't be ashamed of that, but don't sacrifice your children in that pursuit. Your children always have to come first. And I think if you have a rightly ordered perspective on that, you'll be able to accomplish that, even from within the home. I saw comments of people running a hair salon or that kind of thing from their home, and I think that's totally appropriate. There's nothing wrong with that.
I want to bring Cabrini up. It's something we've been talking about here on the show, and there's a split opinion. I got to tell you, there's a split opinion in the audience over Cabrini. I watched it with my wife. We went on a date night. I loved it. I thought it was great. Are there flaws? Yes. I talked about the flaws as well. But when it came to the "I am woman, hear me roar" lines that so many people were concerned about, I wasn't at all concerned about those. I thought they were perfectly fine in the context, because the way they depicted her, and I want to get your comment on this, is she is a strong-willed woman, but at no time does she disrespect authority. She doesn't subvert authority rightly over her. She's challenged by it. She finds ways to navigate those tricky waters. At no time does she blur the lines of gender fluidity. She doesn't try to pretend as though she's a man or whatever. She understands there's differences there. And then, of course, she embraces her role as a woman to care for who? The orphans on the streets of the 5 Points in New York. So I don't know. I just thought it was very beautiful. What was your overall thought on Cabrini, especially in terms of toxic femininity?
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think overall, I think people, whatever their preconceived ideas were or whatever, you're going to go into a movie like that and look for your confirmation bias. That's my opinion. I read both sides of the debate too, and I tried to keep a really open mind. And I think those same lines that you're describing could be taken either way. Were there things that were missed opportunities? Yes. I would have loved to see more sacramentality throughout the movie, that kind of a thing. I think that would have been excellent. That would make sense considering she was a religious. But the movie wasn't for Catholics, and I think we have to keep that in mind as well. However, I think that they did a wonderful job portraying her as a nurturing, loving mother who was doing everything that she could for these poor children, and she was going to fight. Like I saw a lot of myself in her, because I'm not somebody that would be necessarily considered quiet or submissive in the sense that I just you tell me no and I'm not going to push back on it. I mean, every time she gets pushed back, she basically says, "I want to talk to your boss." Except for the Pope. But I love the way that the Pope was portrayed, because he was a loving father. He was firm with her.
Exactly.
And she respected that. And so I loved that dynamic too. It wasn't like she was out to fight the patriarchy. The patriarchy, the patriarchal head of the church, was a loving father to her. And so she maybe found some workarounds, but she worked within the parameters that she was given. So I don't buy that it was this feminist trope. I could see though why people would interpret it that way, if that's the lens you're going into it with. And so I think sometimes we just have to keep that in mind. Like, what are my preconceived notions that I'm going into this with? That changes how we see things. That's a lens.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.